all for coming. I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, March 9th caucus meeting of Narberth Borough Council for 2016. Mr. West, will you call the roll, please?
Richard Diaz. Gigi Templin-Moffett.
Present.
Marlene Richmond.
Here.
Charles Cilia. Present. Bob Wakebright.
Here.
Bob Weisborn.
Here.
Council President Aaron Mudrick.
Present.
Mayor Tom Grady.
Way over here. I see you. Hi.
He's at the kids' table.
First order of business is the interview of a number of candidates for the Zoning Hearing Board alternate position and also the Shade Tree Commission. The Hearing Board alternate position has one vacancy. There are 5 applicants. I would like to give each of these candidates an opportunity, maybe kind of 2 minutes or less in the interest of time, of what you think you could bring to the position. We have a microphone here for public comment so that everyone would be able to hear you. So, Ms. Skeen, could you maybe start off? If you're here, there you are.
Yes, I'm Katie Skeen. I'm applying for the alternate position. And I have no prepared remarks, so thank you. I thought there'd be questions.
There may also be questions.
Okay.
Sure.
So, as I understand it, serving on the Zoning Hearing Board, even as an alternate, involves fair and equitable application of the zoning ordinance. And so what I think I would bring to that role is that I have lived in this community for 10 years. I have absorbed a lot of Narberth history and attended lots of meetings, council meetings, planning commission meetings. I attended the last Zoning Hearing Board meeting to better understand that process. I also have a background as an academic researcher, so I'm used to sifting through evidence, looking for facts, trying to understand what is solid. And I also currently work as an editor. So again, I'm used to reading through sometimes dense material, sometimes dry material, and looking for clarity. So I think that's mainly what I would bring. Plus, as you all might know, I'm familiar with the zoning code. Now I've been reading through it. I don't claim to be an expert on it, but I have been participating in the public input that went into developing the new draft, and I'm familiar with the issues surrounding it.
Thank you. Ms. Pryor?
I wasn't aware that this was happening tonight.
That's okay. I mean, we're not looking for a complete overview of your position, so to speak, but your interest in applying, your reason for applying. I think that would be the first question we ask in every interview. So.
Okay. I'm highly interested in the zoning code. I'm interested in zoning in general. I'm used to sifting through statutes and things like that for my job because I'm an attorney, and my interest and my experience would be well suited to be the alternate.
Thank you. Mr. Willis? Josh Willis, are you here? Can't see because all the lights are out. Okay. Ms. Lonsdorf? Deborah? Okay. And Mr. Martin, I know he's here, I saw him in the hall.
Good evening, folks. I think that the alternate position established by Borough Council is extremely important. I do believe that there's a lot of case history when there isn't an alternate available, where automatically there will be some predetermination in the matters of a tie in a zoning hearing. So I basically just placed my name there because I didn't think we'd have such nice people coming forward to take on that position. So I'm there if you need my assistance during that period of time, or until you pick someone else, because at any individual time you may have called for a hearing and you may have the need for an alternate. I'd be very happy also to work with whoever your selection is to try to bring them up to speed on the municipality's planning code, as well as the mechanics of just precisely what is the differentiation between a zoning hearing board and a board that might be designating a normal legal case, because I do know we have some folks who have some legal background here. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
If any of the councilors have a specific question for any of the members present who are applying for the position, now would be the time. No questions? Okay, great. Let's move on to Shade Tree Commission.
Well, briefly, Aaron, people should know that we received letters and resumes from each of
Yes,
these candidates.
sorry.
We have good background beyond the 90 seconds of conversation tonight, so don't feel like that's our...
Yes, that is very true, and all the council members received that, right? Mr. McGreevy.
Thank you. Robert McGreevy, 149 Marion Avenue, Southside. I'm applying for the Shade Tree Commission, and I know that shade trees is now part of the proposed code, and so the time is right to add reinforcements to the commission. The commission has done some good work, especially 7 years ago with an important planting initiative. I think one of the things we learned from that is that we need to follow up with monitoring the trees. We can't just plant them and hope for the best. We have to also water them on a weekly basis for the first year to ensure that they survive. So this fall I took a special interest in restoring the canopy because I've seen so many trees come down on the south side and very few trees go back in their place. So I am a tree tender graduate of the PHS program, and that qualifies me to kind of monitor the trees that we plant. I organized a planting of 5 trees on Marion Avenue in the fall, together with a group of neighbors and members of the current commission. We collaborated together on that. And that was a great success. We had 14 neighbors turn out. And I see that as the beginning. I would love to do that block by block. PHS offers subsidized trees for just $25, so it's a very affordable thing. And those of us that are tree tenders are trained in the planting and care of the trees. So planting a tree can cost just $25. And we can do that on every block. I would like to see the equivalent of block captains so that we could monitor the growth and care of the trees once they're planted. I'd also like to see a policy level discussion. You know, there may be some sort of policy that the council would like to enact, equivalent to something like a curb renewal program. When a home is sold, the home seller is required to pay the cost of a new curb. And I think that we could do something similar if there is no shade tree within 10 feet of the sidewalk, which is a PHS expectation. And I think that's a kind of guideline of shade trees and walkability that would fit with our code. But there are other ways too that we could go about it. It could be purely voluntary without any sort of policy like that. But I really do think we need a comprehensive plan that we could develop in the first year or two with consultation from folks from the Morris Arboretum to develop a tailored list of tree species that would fit specific locations. From that plan, then we could work either at the policy level or as at a kind of grassroots level, block by block, or a combination of both. So I bring a kind of enthusiasm for doing something about climate change, and I think I represent many of the younger parents with kids who are looking to the future and want to make sure that we have an urban forest in Narberth for generations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Grove?
After listening to this last candidate, I think I just want to be a volunteer. I have a tremendous background in horticulture, even though I've been a school teacher most of my life. I left school at 15, worked in horticulture at various establishments, worked on landscape firms, went to Maristwood Horticultural College, was top student, got my NCH and RHS certificates. Since then, I did work for Philadelphia Green for a while and ran their summer program, City Tree program. I've been trail master at Bridle Wild Trails Association for many years now, just retired, and we've been planting trees all the time there. In Narberth Park, where I live, I've always been involved with ordering and planting trees and discussing what varieties are best for what, or what else. I mean, I've been in, and when we had the Tree Vitalize program here a few years ago, I worked with Fred and with Evan Frazier to plant at least 40 of those trees in Narberth. So I think really I would be a great volunteer to help put them in the ground, especially after this. And I'm still strong, I can still dig. If you're short of somebody, I'll be on the Shade Tree Commission, but I'd certainly like to put in my 2 cents worth, and I would certainly like to volunteer. Thank you.
Mr. Tralles, is that pronounced it correctly?
Tralles.
Tralles.
Thank you for considering me to answer the question of why I would apply for Shade Tree Commission. I've been here for about 2.5 years. Like many of the people that are new here, I plan to raise a family here, and I feel it's important to do my part to keep Narberth beautiful for my own children and the rest of the children here. And I wouldn't just volunteer for any committee. Shade Tree Commission is where I have expertise. It's where I have working knowledge and experience. I'm a registered landscape architect. I'm the director of municipal planning at Natural Lands Trust. I have experience doing park design, landscape plans, landscape inspections. I've got a lot of experience with nursery material. I've also been a consultant. I had said in my letter, I had spent many, many nights at meetings like this in other communities. I think it's time for me to spend some time here in my own community. I've been a consultant to the Montgomery Township Shade Tree Commission, so I've seen how another commission runs their meetings, how they track their projects, how they follow up with maintenance, how they do inventories, how they handle their budget. So I've got some experience working with another Shade Tree Commission as well. So without going through my resume, I have a lot of experience that's tree related and community related. I've run public meetings before. I've done work in Lower Merion Township. I've done work in Radnor Township. None of them are Narberth. I know Narberth is different in a very good way. But being fairly new here, I also feel like I have a little bit of some fresh eyes without knowing the ins and outs of all the projects that the existing commission has done or things that they haven't done for whatever good reasons. I do drive around the community and see a lot of opportunities for new tree plantings, new stormwater management opportunities for rain gardens and things like that. So I think I'm well qualified and I'm interested in doing my part for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell? Is he present? No? And Ms. Harper?
She's not present, but I can give you a 30-second synopsis since I nudged her to put her name
Nice
in.
and loud.
Lorraine Harper is actually a new resident in Narberth, moved into the Methodist Church Apartments after her husband retired from being a doctor up in Allentown to be close to their grandkids in Marion Station. I know her well from her grandkids are my kids' friends, and we go to church together. She is high energy, very organized, and an excellent fundraiser. In addition, until recently, she spent a number of years on the Allentown Shade Tree Commission and is looking to get involved in Narberth in some way and brings that background here from kind of a bigger city Shade Tree Commission, if that's worthwhile. The downside is she spends half of January, February, March, half of April in Tucson. So she said, would love to offer any help she can, including being on the commission. I didn't realize how almost comically overqualified a group of volunteers we have here. So she would be willing at a minimum for the folks on the Shade Tree Commission to be a very active volunteer as you guys build out the programs. But interested in being on it if we need her.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's move on. I think if we were going to consider appointments, it would be on Monday night when we are trying to typically take action on things. So that gives anyone an opportunity, now that we've heard some statements for any follow-up emails, that you should feel comfortable directly emailing the candidates their resumes, their applications, or their comments this evening. Let's move on to informational and discussion. Finance and Administration, Councilor Cilio.
Finance and Administration Committee has a meeting coming up on Monday night at 7:30 in advance of the council business meeting. We do have one item on here for discussion with the broader group, and I'd like to turn over to Sean Metrick, who, we've been talking in his first couple months in the seat as manager, and he's wants to get us oriented a little bit as to time allocations in the office, what they're spending time on, and what sort of projects they have on their plate, so that we can sort of take that back as homework and discuss it again as a committee on Monday, and then come back again in a month and talk across committees and see how that fits in with what the office is up to. So Sean, if I can turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. This is going to be a brief discussion, really just to broach the topic on how things are going. The first 2 months of the new administration in the borough. So I'd like to pass out some written material that you have not seen yet, except for Mr. Cilio. So consider this homework, not something we have to necessarily discuss right at this particular moment. But I would like to take an opportunity to orient council to the document I prepared and to present a discussion and to ask council to consider some recommendations going forward. The first page of this outline, this draft, kind of gets at an idealized structure of how council interacts with borough management and how borough management is supported by borough administration. I picture it as a pyramid, whereas the top of the pyramid is council directing the policy, priorities, and direction of the borough, really being the captain of the ship. And it's management who translates those strategic goals into operational actions. And those management functions coordinate the activity of the entire borough staff, which nothing happens in the borough at all unless someone who's employed by the borough actually does the work of the borough. So the foundation of this pyramid is all the daily activities, the sum total of what our police officers or public works crew does, what our administrative assistant does, and what everyone who contributes to the borough does. On the second page, I kind of made some recommendations I want council to consider, because the diagram kind of gets at what I perceive the existing conditions to be. We're spending a lot of time doing the day-to-day functions, and it's very, we're in a phase of building efficiencies in terms of how we conduct our daily business. So the bottom of the pyramid is quite large. The management section of the period is quite small at this point. And one of the recommendations I have is to integrate all of our management level staff into interacting with council. That means I would like to see council start to interact with the police sergeant directly, with the director of public works directly, the library director, and with Matt and myself, so we can comprise a larger management team to handle the many tasks that council is coming up with. Part of what I'm going to be doing is delegating some of these responsibilities to these other department heads. And the real homework, I guess, I would like my colleagues on council to do is to create a priority list of the projects that you've created as your committee agenda. You'll find those on the third and fourth pages of this document. It's a inventory of everything that each committee has talked about. There's also an inventory of everything the Borough Management Office, myself and Matt and Leslie have identified as important projects to undertake. There's also a section on our capital improvements, all the things that the borough is undertaking. Library Terrace, Windsor Avenue, Green Streets are two things that are currently active right now. So what we need from council is to think a little bit through the whole committee structure. And as a group, think through what you think are some of the priorities of your subcommittees. We can't do every committee's priority at the same time, I guess is my point with that. until we reach some efficiencies and improve our internal processes, we're not going to have opportunities to support council the way I think council ought to be, and the way the public has the expectation of these activities to be supported. We still have a lot of transformation that needs to happen in the borough office. It looks a lot different than it did 3 months ago, but we still have a lot of organizing to undertake and do, and it's just going to take a lot of time. Speaking of time, page 4 is a bubble sketch diagram of what myself, Matt, the Director of Civic Technology, and Leslie Marshall, the Administrative Assistant, allocate our time allocation to certain tasks, our hours allocation, and then I sum those up. This should give you an idea of how much time we're spending doing day-to-day customer service. That's answering telephones and dealing with people who come in the office. It's nearly a quarter of all the person hours that the office administration staff is doing, and it's leaving very little time for project management. Right now we're at about, I estimate, a 15 to 20% threshold in terms of what we're able to dedicate to the projects the council comes up with. I want to see administration get more efficient. I want us to deal with customer service in a better, more efficient manner. We will leverage technology and the skills that Matt has brought to the office to make the administration function more efficiently, and some of this time that we harvest from this efficiency process can go towards project management. We get more of the fun stuff done. So I'm really excited about where we're going to be. I just want council to know it's going to take time. That is my elevator speech for this project, and I think that we will have, now that something is written down, the next time we meet again, Charlie, we could talk about let's make sure I have all of the council committee's projects correctly outlined. Let's think about what the priorities are in each of our council committee meetings come up, and take some time to look at what the borough management projects are. All of the financial, IT infrastructure, human resources, the code administration portion of the borough manager's job as well. There are possibilities to outsource some of this activity, which I think might be one of the recommendations coming down the pike. So that's all I have for you this evening.
Thanks, John. So we'll discuss this Monday night in our Finance Administration Committee, and we'll look at our own committees, initiatives that we've set forth and try to prioritize them. I encourage all the other committees to do the same, and we'll get back together for the next caucus meeting. Fortunately, we have a referee to help us decide the strategic priorities between the different committees in our council president and vice president. And hopefully that'll help streamline things. One thing I do want to call folks' attention to as I was looking through the time allocation in the office is there are about 2 person weeks a month among the management staff that are used in code administration. And I know we've had a discussion in our committee and building and zoning before about outsourcing the zoning officer position. I'd encourage the Building and Zoning Commission to pay a special attention to that part of the time allocation. That may be an opportunity to free up time in a way that's at least in part reimbursable to the borough, freeing up the office staff to do more project management and pushing new initiatives forward.
Thank you, John. Is there anything in this document that would preclude it from being passed around during this meeting so that the public can? Why don't we pass away? I'm going to hand my copy down, so hand that into the audience. And if everyone can take an opportunity, if you'd like to. And you can take a look, and we can figure out a way that we can make this a complete document, so that the community can also see not only the demands on the office, but the projects and priorities that are on the list, so to speak. Is there anything else for Finance and Administration? Councilor Cilia?
Not from our committee.
Okay, let's move on to Public Safety. Councilor Tevlin-Baum.
Thank you, President Friedrich. We met on February 24th, and we were asked to review, from the office, we were asked to review two chapters of the Narberth Borough Code, 109 and 112 as they stood. It appears that 109 is entitled Snow and Ice Removal, and I believe that was written sometime before 1980, but was adopted or amended in 80. And we reviewed it, and we feel the document stands. Okay. So it does not necessarily need revision or changes. However, 112, 112 is streets and sidewalks. In our meeting, there was clearly some dated language. This would we think also was created sometime around 79 or 80, and then there's no reference to any amendments on a timetable where it had been reviewed previously or prior to that enactment. I'm asking tonight if it's with your permission to have Mr. Walco take a look at 112 and give us a red line version and his advice on how we can update. There's some really dated language in here that actually makes reference to committees that no longer exist and to permitting prices and sort of strange language that doesn't seem appropriate.
Is there any discussion amongst council? Any opinions?
I was funny enough just looking at that section independently of Sean today, and I completely agree. There's some duplicative language in
Yeah,
there.
it's fascinating, actually.
Is there an intent, like, to fix something, or just fix the language within the?
Well, and that's why we want to speak to Mr. Walco. If you'd like, I'm happy to give this to you or take it.
I trust that
It seems to me in my first reading we had this conversation. It almost is two documents trying to be one, and then it has very dated references to road systems and road ideas that don't really exist. It doesn't discuss the PennDOT on roads or state roads. We're missing a lot of information. Mm-hmm. And it attempts to not only talk to streets and sidewalks, it talks about curb construction, it talks about opening of roads by other entities and fines. It talks about repairing gutters and fines and imprisonment, of course, as some of these documents do from them. And it talks about driveways and storage areas and what the curb means for your storage area. It's not really an up-to-date document, so that's what we're looking for.
So there's a general consensus that we could send this over to Mr. Walco. He can spend some time and resources, maybe pulling from the modern language from other boroughs of our size in Pennsylvania, and see if we could be presented with something and then decide maybe from there if we want to take any action.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick question? In terms of the money for that, would it be cheaper for us to have the borough copy and paste from there's the Pennsylvania Council for Boroughs has language already ready available for anybody who wants to use it, we're members. We can send that to Walco. And then he does, you know what I mean?
No, I think Mr. Walco would utilize that in addition to codes.
No, I'm saying it would be cheaper for us to send it to him with the instructions and ours to update it. What I'm saying is we're going to pay him a lot more an hour than we are going to ourselves.
I guess I am not in a position where I think it would be appropriate to burden the office. I think we just had a presentation from Mr. Metric. We could make a decision to downshift this. We can use external resources at some cost. Or the committee, if it was so inclined, could take that on to do themselves.
Currently, the committee has civil service requirements that have to be met from last year. Those documents have yet to be returned to us. We are talking with the Civil Service Commission about those.
I'm happy to send you the model language
well,
from the borough.
Before we send anything to Mr. Walco, let's get some things together ourselves. And I will send it to him and CC the chair of the committee when I do so.
Thank you.
Good?
Sure.
Good. Anything, civil service, would you like to delve into that?
So far, we are waiting for the regulations to come back, the documents to come back from the attorneys. We're trying to meld the recommendations from Civil Service Commission, the attorneys, and the previous, as well as this year's Public Safety Committee, and make those adjustments, put it in one document to put it before council. And we're working on it, and there's a lot of information. Maybe not so much changes, but there's just a lot of information to put back into that document. So.
Okay. Next meeting date?
It hasn't been set yet, so.
Okay.
So sorry about that.
Next, Public Works Committee, Council Whitburn.
We met on February, I don't have the exact date in front of me. Unfortunately, I won't say it was a very productive meeting, but we kept certain things in front of ourselves, and then we'll get to the RFQ in a second. We're still concerned about communicating with Lower Merion Township on crossing Wynwood Road safety concerns. We're looking at updating the painting and highlighting crosswalks. We didn't make any progress on that, but we know that's something that's staying fresh and relevant on our agenda. And we continue to want to get more data from your speed signs that we have. And that's going to take some mind share when the borough office gets to that. And then we discussed putting forward an RFQ for a borough-wide parking study plan. And then the office had filled out a RFQ draft, which we circulated. We discussed it. There was some input. It didn't change it a heck of a lot. Everybody on council has seen it. I'd like to, have this put out there. This covers, there's been a lot of discussion. I don't want to break into the bigger discussion this evening, but one way or another, we need a parking plan for this borough, with or without the church, with or without form zoning. It's an issue that is ever present, and we've discussed that we believe we need professionals with guidance from the borough, with a lot of the baseline knowledge from the borough of what we have, what's there that we can provide. But we need to get started on this. And the only way that we're going to get started is first putting out an RFQ, getting it in a handful of quality firms that appeal to the borough, not just that are doing this on a day-to-day basis. We know we're a special place compared to most towns. We just don't have a physical structure. As Bob has kind of alluded to in time, something between a town and a college campus, how we have a lot of different things going on. So anyhow, I'd like to see us put this out there, and we've had a couple names of people that you thought it should go to. I think it doesn't cost us anything at this point, except a little bit more mind share to send them out, and then once they come in to digest them, and hopefully at that point we'll get some inspirational proposals, and then start interviewing those groups and crafting what they're going to provide us with as a plan. And as we've talked about in past meetings, not just a study, not just a plan, but a plan that's a living plan that changes as parts of the borough changes and different living condition changes. So, I don't know if anybody in council has any thoughts or concerns on this.
So I just have two items, because it's the same idea as you. But what we're looking to do is have a parking study and then get a parking plan, right, to implement or make the changes should they be needed, should they be found, should they be needed. So it's maybe a two-part thing, and that's all I want to say. I don't want to say one thing and then get the public to say, well, you did this and now, but we really need two parts. We need two parts.
I differ there because I think, there's going to be a study to create a plan, but unless you have an idea of what you're trying to study for, like one of the things that's happening in form zoning is we got a baseline of how many spots there are, how many, what's the raw goods. That's a study. How we apply that, how we, what the feedback is from the borough residents, the ideas of what percentage of open spots we want, how we use those spots, that's in the plan. And you can't, if you just study and then you don't have a plan that you want to study for, you're kind of going to be left out there. Well, it's good to know we have these spots, but when are they available and such. So that's where I think we want one group that's going to both.
Oh yeah, we want one group to do it. Yeah, absolutely. We want one group to do both.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
That's we're on the same page. One group to do both.
Mr. Celia, you have any thoughts?
I agree with that, and I just wanted to note, to do that, it is a planning process, right? This is not like a 2-month study. This is like a probably 9-month to a year study. Our more experienced planners can maybe I'm overestimating it, but it's probably longer than if you were just doing like traffic counts, just to set people's expectation and in the process. Is that fair?
I think it's a fair question. I just don't know how.
I think you target 4 to 6 months and expect 9 months.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Ideally, it shouldn't be that complex. We have a lot of raw information. We had a ton of discussion, a ton of background from all the form zoning information. But there's reality, as we've seen. And if we want to engage the public in it, that takes time and meetings.
So we discussed this RFP at the Building and Zoning Committee meeting. We discussed the possibility of the Planning Commission working both in reviewing the draft RFP but also probably in engaging and working with design solutions that the parking people may come up with, because they understand the town from their careful study of the town. They have significant expertise to bring to bear on any kind of design solutions that might be presented. And I think they would serve us in an advisory capacity with any future.
Hold on, before we start going back and forth,
Did you
comment?
Good finish.
That's all, and I think we'll mention that in our committee report.
Okay. Councilor Wakebright, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think whoever we hire, that's going to be a main thing. I don't know if it's in the RFQ. It doesn't really matter if it's in the RFQ or not now, but that's certainly, the idea that we discussed and putting the RFQ together is we want management feedback, we want planning commission, we want borough council, we want resident feedback. And feedback might be too light of a word. I think, as you said, the planning commission has done a lot of knowledge base on this, but they're going to be in that conversation, I would suspect, with whoever does this plan. So.
Okay. Councilor Cilio.
I was just going to ask, given this is going to be we'll have an outside vendor, there's going to be some project management associated with this. Maybe the planning commission gets involved. Is Lauren, the planner from the county, who sort of stepped into Mr. Metrick's shoes to help the planning commission with our other planning activities, would she be an available resource to help work on something like this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Under our existing contract?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know.
You should have all.
So we should absolutely have her review the RFP in terms of what services the county can dovetail together with this organization.
To have her review it as well, and just see people who didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, so next steps?
I would rather get people in, and then when we're doing the interview process, connect her and that, because there's nothing worse than, I think you had mentioned this to some level, Charlie. You don't want to taint. One of the things you get of a professional is you get that outside view, and then they gather all this information. But if you tell them you're going to be using, this person for that part, it's something that we kind of thought about when we talked about it. It's a shame nobody else besides our committee was at that when we had one of the groups that we interviewed, and I don't know if they're the right group or not, but that type of feedback and feedback that Mr. Metrick and Mr. West gave us was, these are professionals that do that. We'll add all the, as much mix as we can, and I think Lauren would add quite a bit to that mix. But for the RFQ purpose, let's see who comes to bat and what they want. And that might be an area to save some money if that's the issue, or add more to it. But I don't think
so what are our next steps to move this forward?
The next step would be for Matt and Sean to pick 4 to 6 groups that they feel are interesting out. And Charlie had sent a couple names. We've talked to a couple names. They have a good experience. You might even call Lauren or the county and say, who do you like? And get 6 quotes back. And I think at that point, we'll all have a better knowledge and comfort level of some of the projects others have done and say, wow, that lines up. Let's talk to them.
Okay. And we can make a resolution on Monday night to put this RFQ out and put things in motion. Yes, everyone's nodding?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, that sounds like a plan. Anything else under Public Works?
Those are the key things. We will be meeting Wednesday. It's on the borough calendar. Wednesday the 16th. We've been trying to do 6:30. It's on here at 7:30. I'll ask Sean and Matt if you would prefer earlier.
Yes.
So let's change that to 6:30, and that way you guys don't have that longer period. You're out of town anyhow, right?
I'm going to have to call in, but I can still do that.
Yeah.
Break it.
Okay.
Does that work for you, Ryan?
All right, thank you. Moving on to Property Committee. Councilor Diaz is absent. Vice Chair.
I'm Vice Chair on Property. We did not have a meeting this past month, and I would suggest that Mr. Metrick bring us up to date on the current property projects that are going on. I think there's the elevator, the library terrace, the management of the 201 Sabine Avenue property. Just to give us a sentence on each. I'm not aware of the current status.
The Construction of the Library Terrace addition is going to commence in the next 7 to 10 days. The schedule of construction has been issued to us, and the completion date is the first week of July 2016. We are working in conjunction with Brower Helpman and Yerkes Associates they're doing the construction management services. So we are mostly hands-off in terms of direct management of that project, although there's a lot of co-coordinating going on. There's a time constraint, and there are effects upon the summer concert schedule, amongst other things going on in the park at that time.
And I know that we stressed to the contractor the large event we'll be having on July 4th.
We did.
And the desire to have them cleaned up and moved out in time.
We did.
201 Sabine Elevator.
The 201 Sabine Elevator, I have a punch list of complete elements that need to be completed from our engineer. I did not review them in advance of this meeting. There is some additional work that needs to be done around the elevator bay to shore up the floor supports. And there is a leaking roof that needs to be tended to.
In the elevator area?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. The more time-consuming piece of 201 Sabine is that we've transitioned to a new property manager, and that is a lot of going back and forth with Yentis and Andy Rubin to discuss and transfer knowledge and details. And one of the things that's going to be happening that the property committee should know about is there will be a health and safety assessment of the building, and we've set Yerkes Associates up there to help us understand what needs to be done in the short term, and you might see some of those improvements being done very soon at 201 Sabine.
Okay. One thing to add, Bob, just to the parking is the borough lots to be included in that, both at Sabine Avenue and also here, because I know under the new property manager there were some questions. So thank you. Is that it for property?
So
Next meeting, right?
next meet, we just want to pick, let's see if we can coordinate something.
If I may, I would like the next meeting, one of your agenda items to be to discuss policy and recommendations for use of borough-owned property, so we can correct and help the many people that want to take advantage of borough-owned property for
Exactly. It's
community
kind of a
service.
pressing issue because we've had calls come in and we don't have a written space use policy to be able to rent out, for example, this room. At what price? What are the terms? Do you need insurance? We need to write that down and give guidance to the office. We've got something on the calendar about next Thursday at 8.
And that's your recurring appointment.
Yes, but you had invited, the one that we canceled, remember we invited some of the property users to have this discussion. Are they already invited for next Thursday or not?
I wanted to hear from the committee if you were indeed having the meeting before I invited people to come.
Charlie, is that the 17th?
17th.
Okay, thank you.
I'm still okay to do that. I would have to call in. I've been called out of town Wednesday, Thursday next week.
Okay.
So you'd have you and whoever else plus Bob.
Managers, and you'd be on the phone.
I would. And
Okay.
I think it's, since we did not meet last month, I'd like to stick with it if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fine with me. I think it suits you. Okay, that's all, I guess, for property, unless you have something more.
I'd also, if they're available, and I know it's a night meeting, for the new property manager, if you think it's valuable for them to come and meet the committee, to invite them. Yeah,
So I have met them.
You have met them.
I was involved in the interview process.
Oh, that's right.
So, and we did have an extensive discussion.
Yeah.
So-
We don't need, if we can have part of that meeting be an update on 201 Sabine.
Yeah, I'll speak to Yentis prior to the meeting and have an update, and we speak weekly for about an hour.
Okay.
That's it for property. I'll just make a pause here. Notice that We all feel a little weird yelling at each other because we don't need to yell at each other, but I think a lot of people are having a hard time hearing what we're saying.
Okay,
The volume has kind of dropped recently.
sorry.
So let's make an effort to realize that as we're yelling at each other, we're not really yelling at each other. We're trying to be helpful out into the audience. And I can tell you that one of the items on our to-do list is an AV improvement so that when we have a large meeting like this, you will be able to hear all of us better. Moving to Building and Zoning Committee.
So I have a soft voice, so I'm going to just...
And let me just say a few more comments about Building and Zoning before I hand it off to you. I know most of you, I'm going to guess, most of you are here this evening because of your interest in the form-based code. And this is the section of the meeting where you will have an opportunity to hear counselors discuss the form-based code. My plan, in collaboration with the chair of the committee, is to kind of move the code from, the draft code from the committee to council at large, and then we can have a discussion in public where we can go over the parts that are important to us, things that are problems for us here at the table. There is no vote tonight. Voting on any kind of action would be on Monday night. And so once you've heard, those of you in the public, our discussion, we'll have an opportunity shortly thereafter for public comment. And we invite anyone who has something to say to come forward and tell us. That's the plan, and we'll see how it goes. So, with that said.
This is information from the Building and Zoning Committee. Council members, we met on Friday morning, February 26th at 8 a.m. We were joined by 13 members of the public, 8 of whom shared comments with us. We asked the Borough Administration to present us with the new FEMA floodplain information and to organize our required response to this federal action. And I asked Mr. Metrick to please brief us on that now, if you would.
Sure. The borough is under obligation for continued participation in the flood insurance program to adopt a compliant floodplain conservation district ordinance. I would ask that council consider making a motion this evening to introduce the floodplain conservation district ordinance. It's not on your agenda, so you'll need an action to do that, so that when we meet on April 10th, which is 30-day hence, we can have the hearing and we can get that business done and taken care of and get a compliant floodplain conservation district ordinance on our books. The new maps went into effect March 2nd, and we need to get this ordinance adopted as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Council President, I would ask that item number 7, action items, that our committee will make a motion to introduce the floodplain conservation ordinance.
Okay. I'll ask that before you make that motion, you make a motion to add it to the agenda, just a procedural matter.
Okay, so council members, I move that we add.
Let's do it after public comment.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Next, the Building and Zoning Committee also discussed the borough's needs to review and amend Chapter 50 of the Borough Code, much like the Public Safety Committee's review of Chapters 109 and 112. Chapter 50 of the Borough Code, commonly known as the Borough Code of 1942, that regulates construction and borough policy around building construction. This was largely superseded by the Uniform Construction Code in 2002, although there are sections that we still need to really examine and kind of tune up. We've asked the Borough Administration to read it with us, and the Borough Managers to read it with us. We'll probably be having a conversation much like the one Gigi had today with the council about those public safety sections. We'll have a conversation with you next month like that, and probably ask for an opportunity to consult with the solicitor along the way as we revise the language that's somewhat outdated. We also discussed on Friday the parking RFP that Mr. Wainwright introduced this evening, and we recommended to the Borough Office to task the Planning Commission for their input on that. Obviously, we won't hold up the RFP for that input at this point, but as long as whoever's responding to this RFP understands that they will be engaging with the public, with the various bodies of council and our advisors. So just so they have that expectation. Lastly, we discussed pages 5 and page 12 of the form-based code, chapter 124 of the Borough Code. And while we didn't really see any utility in suggesting changes in the newest draft prior to council discussion, we felt that any modifications we would discuss without the eyes of the full council and input for the community wouldn't be appropriate. So we basically have passed it on to council in the form that it was presented to us by the Narberth Planning Commission and the Montgomery County Planning Commission. We also asked the county planner, Lauren Van Pelt, who is contracted with the borough, to prepare a very detailed summary of the changes, of all the changes that were made in the draft from December 2014 through today. And that's a live document, it's on the SharePoint site, and she will update it as changes are made from now on. So any changes that are made will be updated live on that site, and this document is available to council members, and it's the closest thing we really have to a red line. Because of the way this document was created, partly in Adobe, this is the best that can be done to track all the changes that have ever been made to the draft since December 2014.
Okay.
So unless other members of the committee have something to add at this point, that completes the report, and our next meeting will take place Thursday evening, March 31st at 8 p.m. if that time is acceptable to you guys, the rest of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to take the floor here. Go ahead, Charlie, with the comment.
Very minor bit of business, but when we wrapped up the Finance and Administration Committee, and I said we didn't have any business to come out of our committee, Councilor Richmond kind of elbowed me and said, if it's so important and timely to get a zoning officer appointed, could we make a motion or resolution to do that soon? It's actually a really good idea. Is that something you could bring up on Monday when our solicitor is here? Are you prepared to do that? Out of your committee?
I think
you want to have a discussion?
I'd like actually to have an opportunity to interview Yerkes and have a discussion with Yerkes, and at least have committee members who are interested to talk over with Yerkes and get a proposal from them. I think if we could have a proposal by Monday, we could possibly make that motion if it's urgent. Yeah.
Leave it to judgment. Okay.
I wasn't anticipating we could.
Yeah, I do think it serves us to have the time and have the opportunity to talk to them if that's.
And certainly I'm not aware of, and I like the suggestion, but I'm not aware of the parameters that we're talking about. We're talking about a year, 2 years, are we talking about 8 months? What are we really talking about? And I want to have that conversation very clearly with the office and with our committee, so maybe.
I do know this is not, this is an item that has a neutral consequence to the budget. It's paid for by applicants. Yerkes Associates does provide this kind of service to other municipalities. They already provide construction inspection services to us, so it's not complicated, but I do think we just would like to have a proposal.
Figure out what we're actually asking for.
Well, I think we can ask the office to request a proposal, and that can come to your committee, and you can move it forward as quickly as you can.
So let's do that.
Real briefly, is there a second firm out there that we should also interview? I hate to just have one.
Right, I agree.
For a lot of different reasons. So
Sure.
Let's make it 3. How about that?
Ooh.
Well, yes. So for 3.
3 firms.
We'll need an RFP. And
We'll put ticklers out for 3 firms to give us proposals. How about that?
Very good.
Okay. It is, although I will point out, it is revenue neutral generally because applicants are paying fees that directly pay for the individual who's performing the work. But I think we may see some stylistic differences in the way that they come about their tasks. They are all human beings, even when they're interpreting a code. Okay, so let's put the form-based zoning code on the table. Okay. I'd like to go around the room. I'm going to ask each individual counselor. For the public's information, I emailed each counselor and asked them if they had any individual showstoppers, things they would like to change, I call them nice to haves, but I don't know if that's the right term in this context, that would prevent them from moving forward with the code as it is currently written in the draft 4.0 version, which was recently made available to the public and is on the Borough website. And I will start with Councilor Tevlin Moffett.
Thank you. As I said in my email to Aaron, I don't have any showstoppers. What I do have are some things, I think there's more good here. I think it's been a long process and a thorough process, and I think there are a couple things, clearly going forward I'd like to see adjusted, and one of those things we talk about, and sorry Bob, but this is in my crawl a little bit, about porches. I would rather see us set a standard for porches than to say absolutely no enclosed porches. I'd like us to actually maybe have a discussion or set limits or ideas around what it would look like and what we recommend, like we do with signs, like we do with all the other portions of the code. One of the other pieces that I'd like to see adjusted going forward, but again, not a showstopper, not going to stop me, is that there's, I forget the page and I'm sorry. In the code, it makes reference to, we go currently under the code we are living under currently, a home can be divided into 3 residences, right? 3 apartments, let's say, or 3 individual doors. But in the form-based code, it goes somewhere between 3 to 5. And so what I'd like to say is, and we know this from, well, my experience from New York, is that people were literally, bigger than walk-in closets saying that this is the apartment, and it's $1,200 later. And how do we set that standard for square footage to say this is what constitutes a living space? And if we're going to say 3 to 5 living spaces or 3 to 5 dwellings, I want a definition sort of very clearly, not even sort of, definitely, of what we're talking about, so that people don't wind up, living in walk-in closets. So that's my 2 cents.
I'm just going to ask Mr. Metrick for a point of information. Is there anything in the code now that defines the minimum requirements for a dwelling in those divided homes?
Mm-hmm.
The size of the dwelling by square footage? No.
It's in the building code, however.
Yes.
So when the UCC does, and anyone who were to do, any owners who were to subdivide their building into apartments would be inspected by the borough's engineer, and they would be required to conform to the UCC standards, which would be, are basically human standards.
So they're not in this document.
They're not in this document, they exist elsewhere.
They're in the building code.
Do you know by chance what that might be? Well, let's just make a point to look that up.
Thank you.
But
that's helpful. Thank you. And I'm finished. Nope, I'm finished.
Councilor Cillier.
Yeah, so you had asked, are there any showstoppers, things in the code that are so problematic that you wouldn't advocate passing it as is? There are none of those for me. I think this document was very thoughtfully done over a very long period and incorporates a lot of compromise among different public positions to the point where it's actually a very conservative document. If you came to it fresh and thought, I'm looking at a purely form-based code that would radically change the way things work from the built environment today, that's not what you're going to find. It's really, I would look at it as more of a hybrid code and very reflective of the way the borough is. And so I really think it creates a much better set point for us than the current code by almost every dimension. So no showstoppers for me. There are a couple issues that I'm a little uncomfortable with, but I think they're all issues that can be handled in further study and what I would call like tweaks within the framework of the code. First, parking, and this is reflective of the fact that it's I would say a hybrid code and very compromised to take into account a wide range of community views. I'm uncomfortable though with the inclusion of minimum off-street parking requirements at all. That's section 124-601A, and particularly ones that are still use-based. Section 124-601, that's tables 7 and 8, as you're keeping score. Those kind of minimums, rather than maximums, could prevent adaptive reuse and slow down constructive investment, particularly in the downtown area and Montgomery Avenue area, which are areas of more intense use. And those kind of districts in particular, other municipalities have found it more efficient to manage through provision of central shared parking, either public or private. And I don't see anything in the code specifically regarding publicly owned lots or garages, public access to off-street private lots. However, as we've discussed, as a separate exercise, we are coming up with an RFP for a parking study that would address a lot of those issues, whether under the current code or under any adopted code, and I think that's actually the right way to handle it. The parking minimums that are in this document, while they're not the structure that I would like to see, they are much lower than the ones that are in the current code, while still being pretty conservative as a set point. So they're not going to change the world overnight. So I think it's something we can live with while we do our homework and make further tweaks from there. That's one. Two is uses. So again, this is really reflective of the amount of compromise that's built into the code, and the fact that it's not a pure form-based code. It has use restrictions all over the place in it. And I'm pretty uncomfortable with how strict those limits on use are, especially outside of the commercial areas, which is again something that could really retard adaptive reuse of existing properties. So for example, and just changes in the use patterns of properties today. So in residential zones, that's what, 3B and below? The only permitted non-residential uses, other than family-based childcare, which I'll talk about, just by right uses, the only thing other than residential is what's called a no-impact business. And for those of you taking notes, that's 124.304F, and especially some subsections 2, 3, and 4 require any business that's run out of a house in a residential area to be to only employ residents of the house. So that's a real shame in my view, because it prevents home-based businesses from employing any non-family members. So that's really not reflective of how the economy is evolving. So, and I don't think it's compatible with the skills and entrepreneurial character of a lot of our residents. So it prevents, or I would say continues to prevent, because the current code does too, someone from starting a software business, a design business, or like an architecture partnership in their house, and working out of their house with their partner or with a junior employee while they're getting things up off the ground. And really relevant to the historical character of Narberth, it, I think, unless I'm really reading it wrong, would prevent, like, let's say a family-owned plumbing business that's actually operating out of their kitchen office from having an employee who comes in and works like a bookkeeper. Like a bookkeeper in their house, right? And that's something you could fix after the fact. It's not going to kill us. It might even be something we could make as a final edit, but it's that sort of use restriction that's really baked into the code all over the place that I think makes it a lot more like a use-based code, and it's probably too restrictive, especially in the in the residential areas. And also, like, no one running a home-based business like plumbing or something could put any sign outside their house. Or, like, let's say you had your law office outside in your house. Even some tiny subset of the signs that are pretty heavily defined and regulated by 124.605. I think it's something to be looked at. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, is it a deal killer? No. I mean, it's one little corner of a very elegantly crafted document. So it's something I just like to take a second look at. And then speaking of those kind of uses, and opening them up, I would like to see the conditional uses for the larger commercial and institutional properties to open up on the front end. I think I said this in our last meeting, to include uses that are more consistent with their structure: store, retail, bank, general office, restaurant, small restaurant, artist studio. Even, and it's not in there right now, 1- and 2-family residences. I mean, they'd be a huge 2-family or 1-family residence, but if someone wants to bring a plan and wants to pay for it and invest in the property and keep it going, why not at least let them bring a plan? The one good thing that did get baked into this new draft of the code is the much tighter restrictions and ability of the Planning Commission and Council to impose conditions on those plans, but it's still quite restrictive on the front end in terms of what kinds of plans can be proposed for those properties as well. you know, when all's said and done, it's really a hybrid code, at least as I read it as a non-expert. But it's so superior in so many ways to our current code that I'd be willing to pass it as is and create a new set point, and then address these issues with subsequent study and amendment.
Thank you very much. Councilor Richmond.
I agree with a lot of what's been said. I happen to agree that we should not mandate you cannot enclose your porch. That was something that...
Sorry, is that in the showstopper category, or is that in the tweak category? It's tweak.
It's not, yeah, it's a tweak. I'm also not a fan of mandatory pitch roofs.
You can, you know what, I can hear you. Speak to them.
Okay.
Or pull that microphone over. It's very strange being the only amplified voice.
Okay. All right, can you hear me? A little better? Okay. The first thing I said was that I was, one of the tweaks that I would make is that I would not mandate that you cannot enclose your front porch. The second one that I object to is, I object to mandatory pitch roofs. I think that we should open that up. The one thing that I will say is probably a showstopper for me is that the way that this code is right now, the commercialization on the south side now allows for even greater commercialization than we previously discussed. And that would mean, it would include that the church property can now have 110 people in it and be 100% commercial. I do object to that.
Okay.
And that's it.
Thank you. Councilor Wigbury.
First of all, I just want to say I'm a fan of form-based zoning. So somebody asked that there, Dave. Yeah. We're pretty close on this, but there's 3 or 4, I guess I'll call them showstoppers, things that we don't need to do. It was interesting when Aaron spoke to the public the other night without the public speaking back. One of the things he said, we don't really need a parking study because all these changes would be slow, dry, incremental, and that would be true if you didn't have an opportunity to have 110 employees in a church, 50 employees in a church, 20 or 30 employees in a church, depending on how we work this out. So if that church property is not an issue of becoming an office now, then the parking plan isn't as critical to be done right away. But if that church property is inviting 20, 50, 100 potential cars within whatever time somebody could come in and do that, we would be remiss not to have a plan to match that if we truly wanted that opportunity, because we don't have a plan. And so that's the first thing about this concept of do we need a parking plan or not. If we're going to let this church property go and be, a Wawa or whatever it could be in this new code, you better have a plan for the cars, because otherwise you're just abusing the people who live in that neighborhood.
I would say that would be the most beautiful Wawa. We would have to preserve the facade.
Yeah, it may also have the best parking of any Wawa.
Sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I couldn't.
No, but I came up with solutions rather than just showstoppers. I thought one of the issues that's come up is the idea of apartment buildings would now be available to add to certain areas of South Narberth Avenue. And there are, as we know, a few apartment buildings that square shape, which others have pointed out, and I agree completely, that square shape does not add any value of form to me. The density is another question. I don't really have that big of a problem with the density. I have a problem looking at a house with turrets and shape being a potential square property.
And just to clarify, are you talking about in the green zone on the south side, or are you talking about the yellow zone?
I'm on the South Narberth Avenue.
South yellow zone.
Yeah. And so when I spoke to one of the people who's familiar with this code, one of the simple solution would be if we were willing, you know, it's something we might want to do down the road. I think there's a lot of objection community-wise, and I object to it because I just don't think it does what we're trying to do. But we could recolor parts of South Narberth Avenue, include the existing apartment buildings so that we're in compliance, and then the others, we would recolor them to a shade that, or a zone that doesn't allow the apartment building option. So that was the first solution. It's simple. You know, there's this conversation out there, do we, you know, do this in 2 steps or not? This is a tiny step to pull away that doesn't, you know, it resolves this. We can go back to this in 6 months or 6 years. One of the things that's always been said is it's very unlikely to happen. Well, if it's unlikely to happen, why let it be an issue for the community and for others and for myself? The second thing was the green section of Elmwood Avenue, recolor that to 3C. So it would allow the apartment buildings as it has now, and then that church property could become an apartment building. We still can do things to resolve a mixed use, but not a blanket mixed use that's in there right now. I think that blanket mixed use is, I was under the understanding that that was a mistake, that it was supposed to be in the code as a 50-50 use right now, which is another conversation, which I hadn't, you know, and so we have to kind of resolve if that's a mistake or intentional. But either way, I still think we can create either another, you know, something very similar to what was approached, but that didn't control the head count, didn't control the parking, didn't control the hours. I think we can do that. That's not hard to do. I think we can bring something up within a month. It basically takes the framework we had and, you know, gets back down to that 25, 30 head count, includes language that talks about the hours of operation, and includes language that recognizes where the parking may be, so that it's very clear we don't have somebody come in, spend $2 million on a church, and then either find out that he can't fit his 20 or 30 employees with parking because we're 2-hour zones everywhere, which is not fair to him, or whoever that would be, or to be at risk of them somehow coming back and saying, wait a second, when I invested in this, it wasn't completely 2-hour zoned, but now it is. You're not treating me fairly. So I would like to see actually that part that we're trying to come up with, that we had the mayor's veto on, be reworked in a short period of time to something that's palatable under those areas. Things that the potential developer had said he was amenable to, but we could not get done in time in a non-pressured way prior to that area. So, you know, the mixed use doesn't bother me. The mixed use untethered does, and so to me it's a showstopper right now unless we do something about that mixed use, be it in the form code or as an ancillary document somehow. And with that, I try to put in language of changing the definition of professional office, or having an additional office definition. That may be a way to describe how many employees per square foot. Because as came up in the previous conversation about the church property, there are 4 other properties, it's not a solo property, that unlikely, but still is being included in this language that could come up. And even on those properties, you know, the community really around them has looked at what could happen, because it wasn't, you know, going to happen tomorrow. But if we're going to put language in there, let's recognize that A, we want a professional office mindset, so you don't want crammed cubicles in there. Or maybe we do, but we want to be intentional about what we do. I don't personally want it to that level. So if you have a language of an office use that is described as a maximum of 1 employee per 150 or per 200 square feet, which is not out of hand for a quality office or the professional office, I think that's, you know, a defined thing, and has hours attached to it when they work, or the majority of workers work there. I think you resolve the hot buttons that we had for that. The last question I had was, if we are at the 50-50, mindset within the form-based code. I wasn't quite sure how many parking spots that would allot the employer and the residents under the current draft.
I think we do. Sean, do you have a number?
I don't, not without doing a site analysis.
Because I would think if we reduce the parking requirement to 1 per residence, that's 5. If you've got a drawing that shows 11, which everybody has seen, you're like, that works.
Right.
It doesn't have too much. Now you've got how many other, you have 5 or 6 spots covered. You still have to deal with somewhere between 10 and 25, 10 and 30 additional cars. And how many of those would be getting, zone permits, and how many of those would be, on their own, so to speak. And that's just something I would want cleared up before, if we were to have that 50-50 concept. Where would those cars go? I did want to ask Charlie on the home-based office. Yeah. I hear you because that's my world. But I, for years, and they're no longer here, had a neighbor who had a home-based power washing business. It was the husband and wife. And guess what? Every morning, they had 3 or 4 vans show up with their employees. And fortunately, I had a good relationship with them. But you were always like, why is this happening next to me? And they would start cleaning their vans. And people started banging on the door because they wanted to get their paycheck. So, what are the parameters of something like that when you talk about that type of home-based office? On the enclosed porch, I started out this conversation several months ago being against not letting people enclose their porches, because most of the porches on my side of my block are enclosed. I chose not to do it. I like the open porch concept, but I thought the Planning Commission was very convincing to me in their response to us, that how it changes the setback line by making that part of the property unit. And so, as much as I would prefer the opportunity to do that, I absolutely understand it within context of the form code and would not. I would probably vote for a code that had it, but just because of personal preference, but from the concept of what is a good code, it probably shouldn't have, as my thought.
Just to clarify, you wouldn't vote against a code that permitted people to enclose their porches, but you prefer not to have them be allowed to be enclosed moving forward.
I guess I prefer to let them enclose it, but I know I'm wrong to do that.
Oh, I got you. I wanted to make sure I understood you.
It's okay.
I was like, what?
It's like a bag of potato chips. You know it's wrong, but you're going to permit yourself to do it.
You still want to eat them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's my thoughts on it as of now. But I am concerned that we have that one mistake on the reading. I pointed out another mistake that I had pointed out several months ago that wasn't incorporated. Not a major thing, but I'm just worried that I have not given this a thorough read since we got it back. And I don't think I should be the one giving it a thorough read. I just know that we don't have the code. When you go to the detail in the back about sidewalks, Rockland Avenue has has sidewalks on both sides, according to the draft, and it doesn't have it on the 300 to 400 block, and most of the there's only a small area on the near Wynwood Road that has sidewalks on both sides. Most of it doesn't. So that's just a mistake that was pointed out. The point is, what other mistakes are in there that could cause an issue that we're not seeing? So I just think I'm not ready to advertise it on Monday without a more thorough read, but I'm not saying that I don't think we should have to wait much more than one more month to advertise it personally.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Weisbord.
Sure, thank you. I have a soft voice. I've said a lot, maybe too much on this topic over the past years. I favor this draft of the form-based code because it's the recommendation of the Narberth Planning Commission, and because I attended so many hundreds of hours of meetings, observing from the audience, watching them work, in partnership with all of the various experts that help them do that work. And I know that this document wasn't just kind of cooked up in their kitchen. It was thoroughly worked through painstakingly worked through bi-weekly meetings for many, many years. I think it went on for so many years, I stopped going the last year or so because they were so down in the weeds into the details of this document that it was really hard to kind of, as a layperson, to keep it all clear. But I agree with Charlie that this document is far superior to our existing code, and in that it establishes a kind of framework, or as Charlie calls it, a set point. It's a framework by which we can then navigate future issues. And if there are issues that occur immediately with this of concern to our community, we have a way of tweaking and refining this document. It's much easier to manage than the old code that was really written in kind of legalese at a time when that's the way codes were done, all in language, like they were language-based. And this, and kind of from a top-down perspective, it was sort of like a one-size-fits-all code that the borough got, sort of for a suburban community. And many suburban communities adopted codes very similar to ours in the 40s and before. And this is a more relational code. It's a code that looks at the relationships among the different kinds of neighborhoods within Narberth and says, boy, there's a unique quality over there at Iona and Woodbine that we want to cultivate and maintain, and we treasure that unique neighborhood. And there's a different kind of neighborhood out on Windale. There's a different kind of neighborhood down on Maple and Woodside. And these are all really different, almost like different biomes. They have a different kind of nature unto themselves, and we don't want to lose that. I'm pretty convinced that if we do nothing under our existing code, this community will be unrecognizable to us in the future, just as many portions of Philadelphia have become unrecognizable in short 20, 30 years. I think I used to live in parts of University City. It wasn't called University City, but it's like you can't even, none of it's familiar anymore. Some of those neighborhoods had a lot of value. They're gone now. So I'm in favor of keeping the quality and texture and architectural spirit that is here and cultivating that, and I think this code gives us that opportunity. Now to some specifics. Enclosed porches. There are enclosed porches and there are enclosed porches. It depends on how they're enclosed.
Right.
When I was a kid, we would visit Mrs. Robinson, who was like 100 years old, and she spent a lot of time on her porch in the sun, and it was a kind of partly enclosed porch, and she could just like put a wrap on and be comfortable sunning herself, and that was a really important room in her house. Yeah. But it was also like she was connected to the street from that room because it was kind of glass, and it was a very kind of light enclosure, like shuttered. That's a different kind of enclosure than if you like if you have your sofa out there and you're heating it, and it's really just another room of the house. In fact, in our existing code, I don't know how anyone was ever allowed to put a room like that on their house, because the code says that if you're going to build a house, the first room is behind the setback. So the minute you enclose a porch, you're actually moving the first room into the front yard. So our existing code theoretically doesn't even allow enclosed porches. So for me, the enclosed porch is not a deal breaker, but if it is a deal breaker for someone on the council, I'm fine with allowing a type of enclosure, in which case I think the Planning Commission would have to give us some standards for a kind of enclosure that maintains the porchiness of the porch, and not that it's not just like another room of the house in the front yard. That's all. That's all I want to say about that. I agree with Mr. Wainwright that 50-50 use of civic institutional buildings is a more appropriate ratio than 100%. I think that makes sense to me, that we would have a kind of mixed use with a kind of cap on the other uses, because especially in a residential neighborhood. So, but it doesn't feel like a deal breaker to me, but I'm fine with that kind of meeting sort of in the middle there. I feel that Narberth has always been a mixed-use community, and it's part of what has made us very, very successful. I grew up here as a kid, and there were, like, any block you picked in Narberth had a tradesperson's van or two on it. So, and partly my grandfather felt really comfortable moving here after he retired, because he was a tradesperson and he could park his van out and have his name on the car, on the truck, and he felt really comfortable there as a machinist in this community because there were a lot of other masons, machinists, and painters and plumbers who lived here. Sadly, there aren't very many left. And we have usually often we have to go out of town to find people to do things for us in our homes. But that was the nature of the community in the 60s and 70s. And there were all kinds of enterprises happening all over the place in Narberth. In people's garages, there were people making guns, and there were people doing things. There was a lot of industry all over the place. And I think there are probably some Narberth people here who may remember the 60s or 70s. To me, the idea that you're presenting, Charlie, of like a kind of a mixed-use community, sure, the trade is the kind of commerce that people are doing is different. It's maybe more high-tech, or it's legal work, or it's educational, or it's something like inside the home. It's a no-impact home-based business. But it's still like people being at home, in their homes, they're there with their children when they come home from school, and that's kind of always been a thing that's made Narberth very special, I think, is that kind of beehive of activity. And to me, the form-based code does allow it to a certain extent, maybe not quite enough. I do think that the no-impact home-based business, however, is a construct of the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code, not our local code, so it's controlled by Pennsylvania state law, which says you can't have additional employees there. But we can check on that.
You're correct.
Okay, so
for that standard definition.
For that standard definition of no impact. So if we wanted to create provisions for allowing additional employees, we would have to do something else. We'd have to add to it somehow.
Add a different definition.
At a minimum, you have to provide for this in a residential neighborhood. At a minimum, you have to provide for this.
How would we do it?
Provide for the minimum Pennsylvania standard.
You have to provide for no impact home-based business.
Minimum.
These are the minimum standards that you have to.
So they wouldn't prevent us from allowing something. No. Okay. So I think that's a really point well taken, and we should look at that. Conditional use standards are incredibly good. And I feel that over the last several months, the Planning Commission, in conjunction with our solicitor and borough managers, have made those provisions even tighter, especially around the discussion of the ordinance that was vetoed. And they tightened them up in a way that really give the Borough Council more control over what's considered reasonable. I think many attorneys feel that conditional use isn't that high a bar because things have to be reasonable, but ours is written in such a way that it's pretty tight. It's tighter than most typical municipalities, and actually gives us a lot of ability to protect and maintain the yards and the facades and the exterior of the buildings that we love. And the fact that we've constrained uses is less important when you have that kind of conditional use standard in place. And so while it's not a deal breaker for me that we're constraining, that we're categorizing things and allowing uses, I am more of the mindset that we shouldn't have, it should be more of a pure form-based code.